Decisive action is needed now more than ever. Today, as we stand before the biggest threat our civilization has faced, climate change, we have the opportunity to rewrite history and forge a new way forward as we follow the path towards achieving the SDG goals. Our presence here declares our commitment, a collective pledge to chart a shared roadmap that turns aspirations into realities. The upcoming journey rests on the belief in our collective force. Aligned with the planet's pulse, we channel our passion into forging alliances with the potential to transform people's lives, embracing the certainty that impact unfurls when knowledge takes the form of action. We highly value the unique perspectives gained from the past Finance and Common Summits, which we now welcome in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have evolved into a formidable movement, boasting more than 520 public development banks and over 450 financial institutions. Together, we strengthen our shared vision to empower people with accessible and inclusive tools to be the driving forces of change. Welcome to the 4th Finance and Common Summit, where we stand united to breathe life into a global coalition with shared purposes, to mobilize private capital toward achieving sustainable development goals, to strive to mainstream social impact, to ensure that human rights and climate-positive actions are at the heart of our transformative strategies and programs, to keep paving the way for a future where transformation becomes our legacy.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días. Les agradecemos, por favor, tomar asiento porque vamos a empezar.
Take your seats. We are going to start immediately with our second day sessions. Good morning. Welcome to the 3rd plenary session of the World Summit of Public Banks of Fixed Development 2023. We are building new alliances for the coming generation of funding for development. In this second day, we will have the opportunity to go over some fundamental topics and approach potential financial solutions that bring us closer to meet our 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement. The topic we shall approach in this plenary session is crucial. It's nature-based solutions for adaptation to climate change and social inclusion. In the last few months, we have seen how the impact of climate change are becoming increasingly evident, hence the importance of finding effective solutions to protect the communities and the people from those effects. Many developing countries are not ready yet to face this new reality, and it is fundamental to identify those tools that allow us to adapt to those changes. Before we start, I want to greet all the participants that are joining us online, and we invite them to participate through our social media using the hashtag #Finance in Common 2023 and follow our different accounts to be abreast of our latest news. So to start, it's an honor to introduce our keynote speaker, the Deputy Minister of Policies and Environmental Normalization of the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia, Dr. Sandra Vilardi. Dr. Vilardi is a marine biologist, a doctor in ecology and the environment, and she has a vast experience as a professor at the Andes University and Magdalena University. Deputy Minister Vilardi will be speaking about the key role of social inclusion and particularly the participation of actors such as communities, indigenous peoples, and women in the search for solutions to adapt to climate change. You have the floor, Deputy Minister. Thank you, Jessica. Good morning for everyone. First of all, I want to express my cordial greetings from the Ministry, Susana Muhammad, who was not able to attend because she is in Kenya with Deputy President Francia Marquez in a very important trip regarding climate financing. But I will do my best to tell you what we have been doing from the national government in this deep reflection we have been working on about nature, nature-based solutions, the role of ecology knowledge and traditional wisdom, and how can we insert all of these in your world, the world of finances for development. I would like to start by asking you, who do you admire the most in terms of an investor or capital creator? Which is your benchmark, your role model? Well, my role model is certainly nature. Nature has been for billions of years with biologic evolution, developing capital, developing innovations, creating opportunities for its resources available, generating life and exceptional outcomes. Hundreds of thousands of millions of years of biological evolution, which are certainly the most important capital of our planet Earth, the only planet in which up to now we know that there is human life. Now, do we really see nature as the inspirer? Do we see nature as a possibility to overcome this triple crisis situation of mankind? How much do we recognize ourselves as dependent on the flows from biodiversity that contribute to generate other type of financial capitals, knowledge, culture? We are eco-dependent. We depend, and we have always depended throughout the history of mankind from nature. We are dependent on nature. And in times of crisis and challenges such as these, the times of the triple crisis, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the pollution crisis, should be the benchmark. Nature, then, can also be understood in this dimension of our natural capital, to be closer and to better approach the topics of this meeting. If we acknowledge that we are eco-dependent but also interdependent, we could better think about how are we investing in a capital which generates so many benefits at so many scales and in so different dimensions. Colombia, for instance, is one of the most mega-diverse countries. We are a country in which we have, for instance, 26% of our territory are wetlands of different types, in addition to having marine zones in the Caribbean and also in the Pacific Ocean. And we have almost 56 million hectares of natural forests. So we are one of the countries with the largest megadiversity and biodiversity of the planet, from the páramos to the coral reefs to the floodable areas to the wetlands of the Pacific. So that makes us a very complex country, but we have not yet understood fully the role of biodiversity in that territory. But we are also a country that, under the climate crisis, we have 84% of our population at risk and with social challenges due to climate change, and 86% of our assets are at risk. And this is related to the fact that we have lost the ability of nature to compensate climate changes amidst an overall situation, a global situation, which is increasingly concerning. You have probably seen the indicators for this year. They are concerning. We have broken all the records in terms of temperatures, the Antarctic cask, the threats of weakening of the Atlantic current, of forest fires in Canada that have created a large amount of green gases. So these has significant consequences for the immediate future and how we will be able to face this new situation. So we are losing natural capital and the possibility to learn from nature and to use nature to face those challenges. And this cannot go on. We have, for instance, a very strong dependency, and the climate inaction for 2030 is representing a high percentage of our gross national product. With no adaptation actions, 80% of the agriculture will be affected. 35% of our roads network are at very high risk because of climate change, and we saw that in Colombia over the last 3 years with La Niña. The roads in a hilly tropical country, mountainous country, requires different designs, innovations in infrastructure. But nowadays we are facing a very high risk. 70% of the electric generation of this country depends on hydropower. For instance, in El Niño, which is developing right now, makes it highly vulnerable. Our ports to connect with international trade also have medium and high vulnerability because of the effects associated with the rise in hill level. Therefore, we still have important challenges for climate investment, which represents in average 0.16% of our annual GDP. Additional climate investments range between 1.5 and 3%. So are we really doing the necessary investments to face the social, economic, and environmental challenges we need to face? In the end, it's a question of environmental justice. It's a question of justice for our citizens. And we need to reflect. And that's what we have been doing in this government and this administration. Probably the traditional model is not enough. We all know. But what should we do? Well, this is the map we have used to develop our restoration strategy. This is a map of ecological integrity, how our ecosystems have lost their ability to fix carbon, to regulate water, to generate a habitat for biodiversity, to regulate thermal conditions. We see the Caribbean region, the inter-Andean regions highly affected in their ecological integrity. 12.5 million hectares have very low integrity. And this means that these are areas with a very high climate vulnerability, in addition to a strong difficulty to generate wealth and productive economic activities in those areas. So we need to invest there. We need to recover the nature we lost, because by recovering that nature, we can energize a productive economy, which is different in the area of climate crisis. So how much are we thinking about all of these in the financial system? How innovative and creative are we, based on the reality of the local settlers and the local populations and our demands and the needs of the governments to be able to generate other opportunities? Time is running out, and we have to develop a new framework. Nature generates a lot of flows because of its functionality, and these flows directly contribute to the well-being of people, but also to a productive, real economic possibility. Many of these are material flows, and they are included in our economic accounts. For instance, in terms of food production, water for consumption, raw materials, agriculture, etc. But many of those ecosystems, which are part of biodiversity for human well-being, are free. Water regulation in the soils infiltration to be able to feed the aquifers, evapotranspiration of the wet forests to generate rivers that feed the Andean cities, and that water comes from evapotranspiration of the Amazon forest. The white sand that we so much enjoy when we visit the beaches in the Caribbean, which are the result of a very low erosion associated to coral reefs, which are endangered because of the rise in temperature. Certainly, all of these accounts are not considered in our finances. The Gupta report a couple of years, a report most probably very familiar to all of you, a report which was required to Professor Asguten by the United Kingdom. And that report said that our system has not been able to incorporate what nature contributes to the generation of the world GDP. We have to incorporate it because the accounts are incomplete. And inasmuch we are able to complete those accounts and know how much biodiversity is contributing to economic production, we will be able to invest more and better. And particularly, we will be able to invest in a fairer way for those that are associated with the preservation of biodiversity, our partners in preserving biodiversity. And this is where inclusion becomes so important. It is the indigenous peoples, the areas of the local communities, the Afro-descendant towns, the ones that are preserving the areas with more biodiversity. And they are constantly demanding our recognition, our acknowledgement at all world meetings and panels. So we have to listen to them, and we have to do complete accounting. We are eco-dependent, I repeat. How much do we consider ourselves eco-dependent? Well, a couple of months ago, a very interesting initiative funded by the World Nature Fund started in order to assess that dependency of the companies from nature in 3 countries and the risks associated to the biodiversity crisis. The results coming out are quite interesting, and the time has come for all of us to do these clear accounts. So what's the proposal? We need, amidst this very deep crisis, a crisis of biodiversity, which is nourished by the climate crisis and the pollution crisis, we have to undertake determined actions to strengthen social and ecological resilience in our territories. Resilience is the ability to accept uncertainty and changes, because we are in a time of uncertainty. These years, the climate indicators are showing us that we will exceed the 1.5 very quickly. The World Meteorological Association also reported that. So we will go in an era of climate uncertainty, and the only remedy for uncertainty is resilience. To strengthen resilience involves to be able to have the best of our memory. And the best of our memory in this planet is nature and knowledge. All knowledge systems. And on the other hand, innovation. We need to innovate, and we need to innovate together. We need to bring together memory and innovation in order to strengthen territorial resistance and to respond to the challenges, particularly with the people at the core, the rights of the people at the core. So we need to invest in nature. Let me go back to my original words. The big innovator, the big capital generator, the big expert that has innovated for millions of years of evolution is nature. let's look at nature in a different way, not just from the perspective of aesthetic values, which we all feel extremely proud, for instance, to be the first country with the largest number of butterfly species or birds, but that's not enough. Let us consider how nature has been able to solve processes of efficiency of resources, adaptation to drought, to floods, species to respond, to create, to accumulate, and generate benefits for others. Let's look at nature differently. Let's be inspired by nature. And in this government, we have been inspired by nature. And where have we seen that? We could see in our development plan, we have generated a proposal of the comprehensive plan of the fight against deforestation in the Amazon region in particular, but in other important forests, such as in the Pacific, Catatumbo or Paramillo. And that is based on the fact that we have to reach social agreements with the local communities. Certainly, these territories have been in dispute. Therefore, the issue of biodiversity is part of the peace agenda. We need to strengthen institutionally other agencies that are responsible for controlling. We have to strengthen research, criminal research behind the loss of biodiversity and strengthening of the public force. But particularly, we need to look at nature to understand how can we develop a productive economy with nature and recover the losses. This has to go hand in hand with the generation of jobs. People are no longer beneficiaries. They have to be partners in this strengthening process based on the development of a forest economy, which has been quite primitive in Colombia. Well, you saw the map of ecologic integrity. According to the Kunming-Montreal goals, the latest biodiversity goals in Montreal, we have to restore 30% of the areas for 2030, the areas subject to restoration. We are beginning with a historical goal. We have a goal of 750,000 hectares to be restored in this government or recovered. And we are not going to do it alone. We have to work with the agricultural and cattle raising sector, with companies and enterprises, and everybody's willing to do it. So we are making a couple of changes in the strategies, and in that area, we also need the financial sector, because the recovery of our landscape is the combination of the climate agenda and the biodiversity agenda. To adapt ourselves involves to recover nature and those lost functions, but also to be able to improve our natural capital to develop other productive economies. And it can also help us to revitalize other territories and rebuild peace in some of these areas, and to be able to generate other types of processes. And there we have to invest. We need to invest in nature. We have to invest in natural capital, investing in recovering the lost nature. And another strategy in which we have made significant headway is in the compliance of the NDCs. But at the rate we were doing it, we could accomplish that by 2080. So we have to accelerate the compliance of these NDCs, investment for energy and productive action. And I want to acknowledge the willingness of so many stakeholders, actors, and the private sector. But we need resources to be able to make these investments. We need to invest in NDCs, and we need to invest in nature. These are not short-term investments. We need to expand the deadlines. We need to revise the system in order to accompany these deep transformations we have to undertake. Certainly, countries are suggesting a way to do it, but there are important changes in the financial system that must take place. A while ago, we were talking about uncomfortable topics such as the debt, for instance. The medium and low income countries are making the necessary effort, and we have peace of mind because we are honoring our debts in the case of Colombia, for instance. However, we need important flows to inject in climate and biodiversity actions urgently, expeditiously, effectively. Because, unfortunately, through the traditional vehicles, we don't have a good development of our projects, the Green Fund of Climate or biodiversity. It's at least 5 to 7 years, and we have up to 2030 to accelerate our climate action. So my invitation to conclude is let's use nature as the way to inspire us. Let's invest in that natural capital to generate dividends, to generate jobs, and let's revise the financial structure. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, viceministra.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. We have the fortune of having great panelists today as well. Very many of these decision makers and leaders of development institutions that without a doubt can shed light to this conversation. I will introduce our panelist, Andrés Cayón, President of the European Investment Bank, Juan Pablo Bonilla, Manager of Climate Change and Sustainable Development of the Inter-American Development Bank, Angelica Majolo, Consultant for MIT of the Environmental Solution Initiative, Tammy Newmark, CEO and Managing Partner of the Eco Enterprises Fund, Jaime Pumarejo, Mayor of the City of Barranquilla, Colombia. I will give the floor to the moderator of this panel, Marcos Neto, representative of the United Nations program that has been working in finances at the UNDP that leads the focus of sustainable finances and its implementation in more than 140 countries. Thank you, Jessica. Good morning to all, and welcome. We are going to have a very interesting conversation. I want to thank the Deputy Minister, and I will talk about one of her points, that we remain inspired by nature. More than inspiration, that it is clear that all the economy beyond our own life is marked by nature. So at the level of the SDGs, more than 80% of the 169 goals of the SDGs depend on nature. But today, we are investing, as the Deputy Minister said, only $154 billion per year in nature-based solutions. The New World Framework on Biodiversity that comes from Kunming, Montreal, says that we need to invest, or that the investment gap is $700 billion per year until 2030. So we do have a gap here of $154 billion, but that shouldn't be as complicated because of the importance, the fundamental element for the economy of nature. At the UNDP, the United Nations Program for Development, we work deeply on nature issues for many years already. We have the pride of helping many countries to give the green funds, GCF or other world funds, and we are in an expansion process. We have launched a nature pledge, and we are going to work, for example, in 100 countries to develop national finance plans for biodiversity that can integrate with the climate and with the social elements as well. because nature perhaps is the big thread between the climate, gender, employment, and all of these different aspects. We have a very important panel today. You all have the biographies of all our panelists on the website, so I'm not going to go into the details for each and every one of them. But we are going to speak about this integration. And I wanted to give you just one message about my friends from the European Investment Bank, which is that this conversation starts now, but it continues at 5:30 in the afternoon today, where there will be a workshop, a project clinic for adaptation and nature-based solutions. So if you want, you can speak with our colleagues of the EIB. Now, so you can speak in whatever language you have. You have simultaneous translation to speak into English or Spanish, or here in English or Spanish. But I will speak in English now because the questions are formulated in English. Otherwise, I will be all mistaken to have to start translating at once. So I will give the floor directly to Jaime Pumajero, Mayor of Barranquilla. Jaime.
For the Vice Ministers, Vilardi, the importance of nature-based solutions to reduce climate change vulnerabilities at a national level. How does it resonate at a city level, right? What are you doing to integrate and implement nature-based solutions for climate adaptation in your policies and planning for the city of Barranquilla? You've got about 4 minutes over there for the first round, and then we'll keep on talking.
Okay. Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I believe that all of the national policy, whether it's a city or a territory, one of the big challenges that we have is sometimes disconnection between the government policy or state policy and what happens in a territory. In a country like Colombia, we see that it takes us a lot of time to design the perfect strategy, the perfect regulatory framework. And while we are regulating, we see that underneath illegality and informality wins the battle. So we have a regulatory framework that we are designing. For example, let's give a specific example. When you go out of Cartagena, you see a marvelous bridge that costs more than 500 million pesos, 500,000 million pesos, to avoid cutting the mangroves that were underneath. While the mangrove forest was built, the communities fell and used that space. And every time I go by there, I see a whole set of activities that make me sad. And I say, we wasted that money, and we ended up not doing what we wanted to do. So the road was well done, but we did what we shouldn't have done. So this is a big challenge. What are we doing at a local level? I think that the most important thing in our legacy is first to have planned the territory, understanding that our nature, the one that surrounds us, and the urban one, could be an engine for development, employment, and quality of life. And second, to appropriate nature through icons. And these icons, for example, are the Mallorquin Ciénaga. This had been forgotten for 100 years, and we are showing this to the city, generating an eco park, and having port concessions that we had the intention to generate, and creating a 5-kilometer space of paths through the mangrove forest, paths through the Ciénaga, the recovery of a beach that connects to the Caribbean, and using microalgae to recover the body of water, because we still have water coming there, but increasing the microalgae and placing them in the correct places, we're improving the quality of water. And what we used to see a couple of months ago as a turbid body of water with solid matter, now we are seeing we saw a shark, Medusa, life again in a degraded space. And in very few months, it came back to life. So a criolla innovation that was the use of microalgae, a local company that was aided by the Simón Bolívar University, is selling that knowledge, placing it at the service of the city. And I close with this. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, through working with the private sector, we found the 17 tree species that most adapted in Barranquilla to become a native species, or that was introduced many years ago, and that at the same time needed very little water, and that at the same time could adapt to the long drought times in Barranquilla. We have a nursery in the district of Barranquilla, and a company we founded that is called Siembra Barranquilla that grows those trees up to 3 meters in height, transports them and plants them, generating microclimates and roads and spaces that we call small urban forests to make the city more green, to have better capacity of absorption, because our winters are stronger and our summers are more intense, as you all know. And at the same time, it gave us the opportunity of improving the quality of life of many different sectors. All of this we have done thinking about generating a space where you have quality of life and employment generation. And I end by saying that if you drive a car between Barranquilla and Cartagena, you will see a space that we talk very little about that is called the dry tropical forest. And that dry tropical forest is a space that is invaluable and that is being lost. We need to appropriate it as well, because Colombians believe, and we say, that is just a mountain. We need to change our mindset and start to see how we can preserve that as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad that you mentioned water. Last night I was having a conversation, and we have renewable energy. Water will be essential because we will need much more water for batteries and for all processes. I will go now to Angelica Mayolo, that works at MIT Environmental Solutions Initiative. And you, Angelica.
On climate change. Can you talk about innovative solutions that would enable a greater uptake of nature-based solutions, enable more efficient monitoring of the benefits through more effective engagement of indigenous and Afro-descendant communities?
Bueno, muchas gracias, Marcos, por la
Thank you, Marcos, for that question, and it's an honor to share with each and every one of these speakers in this space.
And I want to focus to speak about the intervention model that the Environmental Solutions Initiative from MIT has been implementing in different countries of Latin America and important cities for biodiversity, but particularly to discuss the strategic role of ethnic communities, particularly the indigenous and Afro-descendant communities in the Americas. This intervention MIT model focuses on how to promote biodiverse cities, resilient cities, through technological development, accompanied by capacity building, local capacity building for the communities that are in high-value ecosystems, and also for the local governments that are in territories concentrating high biodiversity, with two specific objectives: to create territorial planning frameworks acknowledging biodiversity, and secondly, to create nature-based solutions, which are mechanisms of innovative and adaptation mechanisms to empower the local communities. And this is done through three aspects: research, acknowledging MIT in the world, and research from an interdisciplinary component, recognizing the value of the local communities. I believe that citizen science recognizes that in indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities, there are cultural practices that respect nature and adequately manage natural resources. And how can we learn from the traditional practices for research to strengthen our technological development that MIT has been developing in the world for many years? And I want to speak about two pilot projects as an example in Colombia. One in a very important ecosystem, which is Chocó Viejo Gráfico in Quibdó, the capital of Chocó, where we have been working through classes on biodiversity for citizens. We accompany the leaders, the Afro-descendant leaders of community councils, the local universities and environmental authorities, helping them to develop the mechanisms to generate appropriation, particularly in the youth network of Chocó, helping them to transition through projects fighting illegal mining in that region. And the second project in Mocoa on monitoring of climate risk in the local communities, where MIT is working in technology development, but it is the communities that have to put into place that monitoring exercise to prevent landslides. Since this is a meeting associated with climate financing, I want to mention two things. Number one, the need to finance the strengthening of capacity, the financing of capacity building in these communities that need more technical capabilities for their projects and to be able to use the financial mechanisms, because financing not necessarily reaches the communities that are most impacted by climate change and are not necessarily reaching the municipalities and the local governments facing the challenges. In Latin America, there is a coincidence of a high presence of biodiversity and natural wealth, and high poverty and weak institutional capability of the municipalities facing those risks. So what we want to do is to have a comprehensive approach, and we are also beginning to work with the Inter-American Development Bank in a model with Afro-descendant cities in the Americas located in the biodiversity areas to strengthen the local governments with technical capabilities to address those economic and climate change challenges, and the empowerment of the local communities to lead those nature-based solutions with mechanisms allowing for sustainable economic development. Thank you very much, Trice. Well, you are insisting on the training topic, and it's important to approach it from the communities. The communities should also be trained to use that in financial innovation. And let me go to my friend Boraz, the Vice President of the Investment Bank, and thank you for organizing this panel.
All the issues of co-benefits, local, national level, the essence of nature for economic and social benefits, as well as fighting climate. How does a multilateral development bank like the EIB support the mainstreaming and financing of nature-based solutions for climate adaptation? What are the challenges you're facing? And how are you dealing with those challenges?
Thank you very much. Good morning, and apologies to not to be able to speak in Spanish, but it will be much clearer in English, I hope. What I would say is the following, and the examples we had this morning from the minister, from the mayor, from you, were extremely illustrating about the importance of nature-based solution if you want to tackle the vulnerabilities of the population to climate change. And I think this is something that Juan Pablo will certainly also stress this. Among the community of multilateral development banks, and we, EIB, we call ourselves the Climate Bank of the European Union, this has become really prominent. And we try to do more and more on this. And we try to develop and support nature-positive activities. Those who are, trying to look at the drivers of losses of nature and support biodiversity, restoration, etc. We do that through a number of instruments, like the projects that were supported this morning. A lot, actually, that we do is through two types of projects: blended finance, especially in cities, I mean, urban planning is a big element of supporting nature-based solution, be it, for example, restoration or flood protection in Florence in Italy, or be it in Athens, how you can use the greenization of the city to fight the heat that is becoming a problem year after year. And the second thing is, of course, everything you can do to help reforestation, this kind of elements. Now, when you look at statistics, the problem we face, and I think let's be frank, this is more difficult to develop a lot of projects in nature-based solution, even if we understand how important they are, than to develop big projects in the wind power or solar power. Why? Because one, they are mostly public sector projects. When you look at the size of all the projects that are reported, those where most than 50% of the project costs are supported by private sector companies is 5%. So mostly these are public sector projects. And mostly these are small projects. 44% of the projects are investment costs below $1 million. They are long-term, that is not an issue. There are long-term projects, we are here to finance long-term projects. So we need to find ways to deal with these two specificities, that we don't have enough private sector projects or support, and how can we try to bring the private sector to finance more of these projects, and how can we support or find technicalities for smaller projects to be grouped, to be bundled, so that they can be financed through institutions like EIB, IDB, or other development banks, actually also public development banks.
Thank you. It's fascinating. So basically, aggregation of smaller projects so it can become visible to players like yours, but also the revenue generating aspect, so it becomes attractive to the private sector. Now, you've been trying to do that.
I'm up, I think.
You know, right? Tammy Newmark, Managing Partner and CEO of Eco Enterprise Fund. I'm not even going to ask you the question. How do you solve that? Yeah, revenue generating and the size, go for it.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate being on this panel. And both European Investment Bank and Inter-American Development Bank have been our investors for the last two funds, and have been very instrumental for us to continue to do our work. And so Eco Enterprises Fund, just to step back for a moment, we've been around for about 25 years. And so, of course, talking about nature-based solutions in 1998 versus 2023, it's a whole different ballgame. But at the same time, it's still a nut to crack, especially when you're talking about biological corridors, ecosystems, precious ecosystems, watersheds, working landscapes, places where indigenous communities, local communities, rural areas we focus on Latin America, need investment capital, as well as technical assistance, as well as various different entrepreneurial ventures in order to uplift the local economy. And so, as many of you know in this audience, SMEs are a huge driver of that sort of economic activity. And so what we have done over the last 25 years is really identify, cherry pick those businesses that are doing very innovative and transformative work in terms of natural capital, in terms of natural assets, whether or not that's in regenerative agriculture or agroforestry, fisheries, emerging opportunities, which we're seeing now in circular economy and on-farm renewable energy systems, there is a void in the marketplace, and there's a need for capital to sort of underwrite and support the growth of these businesses to sort of replicate their activities throughout the region, in countries, as well as this year in our portfolio, we see a company that has gone from Mexico and the LATAM region, global south to global south, into India and Kenya. And so it's taking those examples of businesses to replicate, and it's really that is what catalyzes the changes that we're seeing now in the nature-based solutions area. So we're a women-owned and women-managed investment fund. We build portfolios for the planet, as we've been saying, and we're on our third fund and expect to launch our fourth fund next year. And what is really important for us is that stakeholder ownership, because when you're working in rural areas, when you're working with local communities, when you want impactful outcomes, you need to have local communities and local stakeholders as part of the ownership, as part of the benefit sharing of those businesses, because what we're talking about is sustainability of the natural resource base. And with that is a huge, all these different vested parties that are important for the growth of these areas. And so what we have seen in building our portfolio is some excellent models that have really taken us to where we are today. And when we're just a tool, like there's other tools, but when you sort of aggregate the data, going back to your aggregate number, we're talking about small companies that have a few $1 million in sales up to maybe $50 million in sales in the SME space, but we have aggregated our numbers to show that our companies have generated $3 billion in sales. I mean, that's significant monies that go into the local communities. We have seen, tens of thousands of small producers involved, because if it's ag related, you have small producers that are part of the overall success of the company. I just quickly want to give one example of a company that's here in Colombia that works in natural colorants, that is really sort of a vanguard of changes in trying to incorporate local communities, indigenous communities, into their patent, into their work with the jagua nut. And it has put into its patent a clause for access to benefit sharing under the UN Nagoya Protocol. The local community takes advantage of the sales. All the sales from that biodiverse region go back into the community, the first to do so in Colombia, the first really to do so globally. And this is the type of stakeholder engagement that we're looking for in order to keep the economics local, to keep those examples that people could build off of, and then sort of introduce more nature-based solutions as sort of the trends continue. So thank you.
Thanks. What is the size of the fund?
So the size of Fund 3 is $111 million. The size of Fund 4 will be $150 to $200 million.
So there's hope. It's growing.
Well, yeah, the size of Fund 1 was $5 million. So there you have it.
That's a good story. Juan Pablo Bonilla, Manager of Climate Change and Sustainable Development Sector, Inter-American Development Bank. So I guess you invest in her, which is good. But how can MDBs more effectively, with the PDBs that are here, that connection, and other partners, right, effectively deploy and scale up nature-based solutions? What is the IDB doing at this?
Bueno, muchas gracias. Un placer estar en este.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in this panel, and thank you, Deputy Minister, for your opening words.
La charla que escuchamos ayer de Héctor Abad.
Connecting what the Vice Minister said and the presentation by Héctor Abad yesterday, something is very important. Diversity and nature should not just inspire us, but it has to be part of our identity. I believe that biodiversity, not just for the South, but also for the North, it has to be part of generating identity and pride, which is fundamental for the work with our communities. I am going to start at the level of COPs, and then I will talk about the scale-up, because it's fundamental to understand that balance. The COP of climate change of Glasgow, for the very first time, gave a very strong signal to start articulating the climate change with the biodiversity agenda. And for the first time, the banks are jointly making a statement for nature, people, and planet. I think that that was a very important signal to acknowledge that climate change is becoming the main threat for biodiversity. And at the same time, biodiversity and nature-based solutions are part of the solution to the question of adaptation. As the Deputy Minister said, the resilience, and something very important mentioned by Jaime, the work with the communities, the climate agenda, the sustainability agenda. If we are not connected to the communities, not just to improve quality of life, but for job creation, that has no future in developing countries. These two agendas must work together. And then we went to Montreal, and there is a strong mandate for banks to start complying with the challenges on biodiversity. So we are leaving a very important moment to see how both agendas share common points, to think about escalating financing. The president of the bank spoke about different financial instruments that we are developing. Debt swaps, sustainability bonds, and clauses related to hurricanes. And what we have learned over the years is that we must have both agendas simultaneously. For instance, the nature swap that we developed for Barbados is a debt swap in which we will release about $50 million to create a fund for protected areas and to work in the blue economy. But at the same time, we include the hurricane clause, which the bank is developing for the Caribbean countries. We must have contingency lines for disasters. This is a product we have developed for the Ministries of Finance in the last few years. So these two agendas converge. The sustainability green bonds, the bond we developed for Uruguay, is the first one developed in the developing world in order to reward the compliance with goals linked to NDC. And we also have a KPI, which is connected to biodiversity and forestry. So for the future, for many countries, this debt swap is an option according to their debt profile, but they want to measure results. But what's fundamental is how we work with countries in order to develop that capability. Sometimes we concentrate on the instrument and we don't know how to make it work properly. The bank has invested about a year and a half in non-reversible technical cooperation to generate the measurement frameworks for swaps and for bonds. And this is the first step to escalate. And the other is blended finance. We have worked a lot for over 10 years in blended finance for mitigation. That's how we started, using all the multilateral banks and or the development banks together with the green climate funds, the climate investment funds, and other bilateral sources. And this blended finance, which is concessional to promote renewable energies. The private area of the bank is a great example. It has not just worked with the Green Fund, but with Canada, they organized the fund to do the blended financial for renewable energies. Javin Invest is beginning for the first time with the government of Canada to have a fund that will be for blended finance in adaptation and to discuss nature issues. And with Canada, we're beginning an accelerator for nature-based solutions. So that will be all. Well, thank you very much that you mentioned the Uruguayan bond. We are partners. We work together. And now it is our turn to verify the KPIs. Ross, would you like to say something?
Very, very briefly, but everything that Juan Pablo has said is right. There is one thing that I would stress, because we are here among public development banks, and I think this is something that probably many of the colleagues participating see as a true issue. It often starts inside the institutions. We need to do much more in terms of capacity building inside the institution, in terms of knowledge, in terms of making sure that when you assess a project, you ask yourself, okay, is there something like we do with adaptation? Is there something we can add in terms of nature-based or nature-positive investment of part of this investment? I mean, all this takes time, but it's going to be extremely important to develop this if we want to have a success on nature-based solution.
Thank you. Juan Pablo started his talk talking about his journey to Glasgow and to Montreal. I'm going to come back to you guys with a last question in a minute, but I want you to start think. And that question is, what do you want to see on nature-based solutions by COP28, the climate COP at the end of the year, and by COP16 on the CBD, which I think is next year? But before you answer that, I want to go to the audience. Right. I think we have microphones somewhere around here. There comes Anna. Anna's coming. Folks, a couple of questions from you. Remember, you're asking a question, so please be brief on asking the question so there's more time for the dialogue. If you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll pick you up. A couple of people. If not, I'll just turn back here and we'll have this thing about the COP in mind. Right, I got all the way up there. All right, give it here. Give it to the lady here, and then you've got time to get all the way up. Look at that.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Ana Maria Rodriguez. I am an economist from Bancoldex. I would like to ask and take advantage of the participation of the IDB representatives and the experience of MIT to try to assess the projects that have been funded in Colombia recently, the impact assessments that you have done. And it would be very interesting for the future in this type of panels to assess the impact on these and the large projects that will come in the future of a government and administration that wants to work in these areas. Who has the microphone up there? Please ask your question very briefly. Good morning. Honduras is a country with a high potential for the generation of energy, of power, but at the same time, most of our territory is populated by indigenous peoples that oppose to the implementation of projects, particularly hydropower projects. How can we flexibilize the financial system for access to credit for these groups, which in truth, they don't have the money, but they have the most important, which is the resources, the land, and their labor? How can we flexibilize this credit so that they are available to the base populations in the case of Honduras?
Do we have anybody here? Yes, good morning. My name is Daniel Lopez. You have a very long paper there. Be brief. My name is Daniel Lopez Fagiano, and I am the executive director of the Maera Brazil Institute. Unfortunately, I have only 2 minutes, but I will try to speak as fast as possible so that I don't bother you. I will go straight to the point. In these 2 minutes, while I speak with you, about 4.5 hectares are being deforested in the Brazilian Amazon region. So to begin with, if we want to talk about nature-based solutions, we need to preserve nature and invest in biodiversity. So it sounds complicated. The IDB speaks about nature-based solutions while they contribute to projects, for example, raising eucalyptus in Paraguay and Brazil in indigenous territories. In Paraguay, the Paracel project intends to grow close to 140 millions of eucalyptus trees. One eucalyptus takes between 1.2 and 46.2 liters of water per day. So 140 million eucalyptus trees that use a mean of 3 318 million liters of water per day. 3,318 million liters of water per day. So that is the reality, but the propaganda, they sell the projects such as forest repopulation. And lastly, to end, I'm thinking about the lessons of the big teacher Paulo Freire that says the head thinks where the feet step. So I don't understand why in the last 500 years we have the same people that don't live in the Amazon territory talking about false environmental solutions. If you want nature-based solutions, ask the indigenous people and the traditional people. If you want to fight climate crises, learn first to listen to the teachings of the people that live in the Amazon territory. There is no biodiversity without cultural diversity. Monoculture of ideas will only intensify and accelerate climate crises. Thank you very much. So we have a topic of assessments. And perhaps I will talk about a joint topic, which is, I would like to say, of tensions between the communities, the issue of the hydropower companies in Honduras, our colleague here, with listening to the communities. So I will start by you, or with the mayor with a question. I would like to ask a question or a reflection, because I believe that we're focused towards the financing. And this is as follows: the voice of a mayor that faces the challenge of finding funding. And I celebrate that we're very close, after 3 years of working with Juan Pablo and the IDB, that we will have our first credit, our first loan to a territorial entity in Colombia with sovereign guarantee that will allow lending to 25 years with a considerably lower rate. And large part of that investment is adaptation to climate change and also investment in environmental projects. And the AFD also gave one of the most important credits for me that have existed in the last few years in Colombia, because we placed $140 million as budget credit directly to the city without sovereign guarantee. And something similar is what we're doing with the CAF. And this becomes very difficult to do for most of the mayors, and also to change the rules so that, for example, this is not oriented to a single project, but to goals and indicators. That becomes even more complicated. So my question is, what can we do so that it is feasible, fast, and in the second place, how can we change a model that is that guarantees too much and has been worried about not making mistakes? I think if we want to adapt and change the world quickly, we need to accept that we need to make mistakes. We are going to make mistakes, and that has to be included in the economic models. How do we include the speed of action and the change in mindset in those models so that we can truly act? Sorry, Angelica, after Pablo. With the topic of relationships with communities and the need, this is something important, and mainly in biodiversity. Climate, 1 unit of carbon is a unit of carbon. Biodiversity in the Amazons is a unit. And I want to speak a little bit about the very important question asked by our colleague from Honduras on how to improve funding for ethnic communities that have collective territories. And that is a challenge throughout Latin America. We have generated knowledge in indigenous communities in almost all countries of the Americas, and in Afro-descendant communities in Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, Suriname, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And the challenge is that the recognition of that collective title is not accompanied by financial instruments to recognize the diversity in those territories. And that is part of the challenges in Latin America. From the academia, we have seen solutions such as the creating of guarantee funds accompanied by technical capacity. And I insist for the formulation of sustainable projects, because it's not only access to funding without the technical capacity to formulate, structure, and implement projects that definitely generate economic development models that are sustainable through developing power, tourism, nature, preservation projects, etc. We have advanced, for example, in RED Plus projects and recognition for the work that Juan Pablo did back then, so that communities from Choco can have RED Plus projects. But I want to give another challenge to financiers, which is that none of the countries in Latin America has done enough to guarantee financial access with enough technical accompaniment so that those collective territories can be developed. That is why I have a theory that only poor owners of land in the Americas are the ethnic communities. And if the investment bank doesn't work together with the states to create those credit guarantees that allow access to true funding. And the second thing that I believe that answers questions on the COP. I would like to see in Dubai greater participation of the ethnic communities in the negotiating teams in the country. It is unfortunate when you see that in Latin America, with such a large population of indigenous and Afro-descendant people, there are no negotiators of ethnic people in our countries. And this is a call that from MIT, specifically from the Forum of Climate Change, we have been doing to several countries, especially the four that make up the Choco, Colombia, Panama, Peru, Ecuador, and Costa Rica, that we definitely need that the perspective of ethnic communities that are highly impacted by climate effects are part of the vision of the negotiation that these countries represent at COP.
Bueno, las preguntas.
Excellent questions, and thank you very much for the intervention by Brazil. I am the first one to enjoy these open discussions, and I think that part of the evolution of all development banks is to continue to improve. We have made many mistakes in the past, but the DNA of multilateral banks involves getting community work, climate change, and biodiversity to make it part of our DNA for the future. So the president of the bank spoke about Amazon Forever. This is a new program we are starting. We had a joint coalition event with all the banks, and this is going to be a huge financing challenge for the future. Something I have learned in the bank working with indigenous communities, and I take the example of the Amazon region. We developed a fund together with the Korean Green Fund. And from the beginning, we started talking to them and COICA. And COICA said, Juan Pablo, we don't want to be co-beneficiaries of projects. We want to be co-creators instead of beneficiaries. And I think that's very important. And the relation with COICA has been evolving. The bank is providing them non-reimbursable technical cooperation to strengthen COICA for the generation of projects. And Fanny, the new coordinator, the president of COICA, she's a Colombian indigenous woman. We are very proud of her. We have been working with her to have part of that fund with direct access to the indigenous communities. And another fund we are developing for the Amazon region with multi-donors of several countries, members of the bank. So I think this is a learning process, and we have to learn together. And it's also applicable to the Honduras project. The coordination unit of the Amazon of the bank just closed the applications for a project. So we are evolving, we are improving, and any criticism or suggestion, most and welcome. Thank you very much. Oh, the only thing I wanted to clarify, all our banks have environmental and social policy. These are the environmental and social safeguards of our development banks. Any project that we are funding now have to go through a very strong filter of compliance with those policies, which include not just environmental issues, but also climate risk assessment. Soon we will have to include risks of biodiversity. I think that tomorrow we have a meeting on climate risk and biodiversity. And the other one is the social aspect, consultation with the communities. So this is helping us to safeguard our projects. An assessment. Let me finish with assessment. As the IDB said, that this is a learning process for ourselves. The Deputy Minister mentioned something fundamental, the economic assessment of biodiversity. And as the Gupta report said, the As Gupta report, I had the honor to be part of the advisory group of As Gupta report, and he said, nature should be at the center of economics. And that this was commissioned by the Treasury of the United Kingdom, not the Environment Secretary, but the government of the United Kingdom, because this is going to be fundamental for assessment. Assessment has to be done at the project level, but we must also think at the level of national accounts. Something that the bank is beginning to support is how to assess nature in the national accounts. With the Central Bank of Chile, we are making some progress. In Colombia, we are also working with the Ministry of the Environment, and this is going to be fundamental for the future. But at the project level, we have to see not just the impact on biodiversity, but the benefit of biodiversity for the project. It's very complex, but we can discuss that further. Thank you. COP. I think that the most important factor of COP is to see how the different levels are becoming stakeholders, actors at the subnational level, at the level of the governor's office and the states, and beyond the ministries of the environment, the ministries of finance and the planning ministries and health ministries. For the first time in COP, we will have a health day and the impact of climate change on health.
The mayor on how to simplify access. Quickly, please.
So what you're going to see at COP28 is something that is not very sexy, but that is very important. We need to speak the same language. And you are going to see at COP28, hopefully, a statement from NDBs about measurement, monitoring of nature-positive investments. And that, you can say, in itself means little. Actually, it means a lot because it is the basis for then scaling up. So my hope is that. I would hope that in this kind of environment, we would be able also among MDBs, where there is a lot of dialogue and discussions, to also put in common, for example, capacity buildings, so that we can do the most effective ones for the projects that we finance. That's something that may come. And to the mayor, I think this is one of the things that maybe we could be more helpful to help in terms of capacity building, because it is also how you can be closer to the local level, and things are different in every country. But I have to say that the mayor said something that I think is very important. He said that you need to accept to do mistakes, and that's where we also are not necessarily at our best.
Well, you have shareholders. Tammy, COP, what do you want to see?
So for us, we focus on mainstreaming the whole concept within the capital markets, within impact investing. That's our particular niche that we're in. So what we are seeing, though, getting back to definitions, getting back to impact outcomes and metrics and indicators, is there's sort of a blurring between the bottom up and the top down, which is a good trend to see, but we don't want to lose the integrity of the actual impact outcomes. And I think that when you incorporate private sector, when you incorporate the capital markets, you now need to include and retain that transparency, that openness, that communication, that lessons learned, that integrity. And so I really look forward to then that outcome of COP, because yes, it's not sexy, but it's definitely necessary, even within the impact investing industry, in order to scale to the way we want to scale in nature-based solutions.
Okay. La COP. ¿Qué quieres ver la COP?
What do you want from COP?
Lo que quisiera ver no va a pasar.
What I would like to see is not going to happen. I would like that at the end, people would understand that there are two worlds. One that needs to speak about the nature positive, and we are the countries that are mega diverse, like Colombia or Brazil and so many others. And we are suffering from devastations. We are suffering from climate change. And that there has to be the same investment there than the other conversation that is just as important, but it is not related that much to us, which is the climate positive one, where we have different players that have to put their hands on their hearts and say, we are causing harm to another part of the world, and we're not acting as fast as we should. So what would I like to see? I would like to see that these two things were just equally important, and that the developed world would start to act in a more deliberate manner to save up on fatalities, on life losses, and the very difficult work that we have those in the middle and low-income countries. So to the point of our colleague, I think it's very important, as a Brazilian born and raised in the Amazon region.
That's why the Brazilian president has invited the COP to Belém, the city I was born, because it is time to listen and it's time to see the realities of the Amazon. So in that sense, COP 30, we still got 28 and 29, but COP 30 will be there so people can listen to the Amazon. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. And, you know,
we don't have a microphone, so we can't see what is being said.
Un momento para que la traductora la escuche. Perdona, la traductora.
We need a moment for the microphone, please.
Discúlpenme.
I apologize, and I'm going to be rude to you. At a world level, we're celebrating the International Indigenous Women's Day. And just one question for all of you. Will it be fair, or should it be fair, that those that have preserved during thousands and thousands of years biodiversity, caring for Mother Earth, today we need to hear that there will be a change in terms of external debt for something that we have not spent? Is that fair? Is it fair that today invisibilization of our knowledge is only in the academic panels around the world, and now in the experience we have in the territories, in the image, we see that modernization, having renewable energy again, but in those territories in La Guajira, the communities where these cables go through that take energy or power to the civilized world, the one you call the civilized world, the world of economic renewal, don't have that power, that same power. But have you asked yourselves if the development and wealth model that you have produced for so many years in the world is the one we want? Is indebtedness not a new colonization towards our countries? I wanted for you to reflect on that, because many of our knowledges have been lost. The world has seen them get lost without doing anything about it, but we are going to need them today. So let's please consider the indigenous people, not as objects of the academia, but as subjects of rights that will participate caring for the future world. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for speaking. And this is the end with this reflection, and hopefully we will be able to take that question of that colleague back to our hearts.
Pues indudablemente la búsqueda de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza para adaptarnos al cambio climático es un tema que seguirá teniendo protagonismo. Quiero expresar
I want to express my appreciation to our speakers, our panelists, and to all those that both virtually and face-to-face participated from this conversation. And that is the conclusion of the third plenary of the summit, the FIC Summit 2023. And after the 15-minute break, please participate on the third panel that will talk about how access to financial markets can transform SMEs in Latin America and the Caribbean. And there will be different roundtables where we will look at topics such as financing of food systems for resilient futures, Roundtable 7, how to solve financial limitations of the BPD to enhance the SDGs, Roundtable 8, and take advantage of public and private financing for sustainable funds, table number 9. And at 2 p.m., we will gather in the same room for plenary number 4, where we will speak about how to align public and private funding with the SDGs. Also, that all sessions are being forecasted, so everybody around the world can join this very important meeting. Enjoy your break, and we will see you during the next session.